Thanks so much for joining us today and welcome back to WAMS Webinar Wednesdays. My name is Ashley Lopp, Marketing Manager at WAMS, and today we will discuss the most common requirements for a cybersecurity insurance policy. Back at it again with DataStream, a leading provider of comprehensive cybersecurity insurance solutions for small to mid-sized businesses that work directly with technology partners like WAMS. We are joined by Andy Liverman-Anderson, CEO, and John Reith, Channel Manager. Today we'll cover why cybersecurity insurance has become necessary for small to mid-sized businesses, why cyber insurance has recently become more difficult for small to mid-sized businesses to obtain, two of the top current requirements and the next one kind of on the rise, and how DataStream and WAMS can help ensure you are never turned down when applying for coverage. Then we'll go ahead and do a Q&A. For those of you unfamiliar, I'll share a little bit about us. We've been around since '74. We work with small businesses and law firms, and we do specialize in IT for the legal industry. We keep our agreements friendly and always approach contracts with a win-win philosophy. Our team is comprised of experts with certifications in every platform we work with, and as always, WAMS is dedicated to the success of our clients. We measure our success by how well we take care of our clients. Please enter all questions into the chat and we will address them at the end. With that, I'll hand it off to Andy.
Ashley, thank you for having us. It's always a pleasure chatting with you guys. Yeah, and I think this is a topic that is obviously top of mind for us, but increasingly an issue for the folks that the partners that we work with, like WAMS, in terms of making sure that their customers are ready for cyber, to get cyber insurance and understanding kind of how the market is perceiving folks. And it's certainly things, I think everyone was quite surprised kind of how quickly the market has shifted from what a relatively easy market to get coverage to, it's called a harder market, where it's just harder to get coverage. So yeah, we'll jump through kind of what's driving that, answer any questions, get into some of the specifics that that we see different carriers are looking for and kind of rolling through. So without further ado, we can get going, and I'll pass the ball to John because he knows this space really well.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Andy. And to get us started, we're really just going to talk about some of the highlights of why we're seeing cyber assurance as more of a need, really, in the space. And these are going to be numbers that we have tailored more towards the law firm side, knowing that the WAMS does have a majority of their customers as kind of in that legal industry. So when we do see some numbers out there, specifically around cyber attacks and law firms, about 29% of law firms actually had some kind of cyber attack last year. And then 25% of ransomware actually targeted the professional services, specifically actually focusing in on the smaller and medium-sized law firms. And the average cost for the legal industry is actually quite a bit higher than most of the other industries out there, averaging around 2.8 million for data breach.
Yeah, and I think these are some great statistics, and I think particularly small to medium-sized businesses often struggle to understand, why am I being targeted here, right? Like I'm not. Why am I on the radar screen for these different threat actors? And I think what people need to understand is that they're not specifically targeted for the most part, right? It's more like, just the way you probably get lots of spam. The processes that these criminals, and it's mostly criminals, are using are relatively automated, and so they're literally deploying these bots, often sending actual spam. Is a big threat is actually phishing, these sort of automated these campaigns that begin with email, and then they're just sort of waiting once that attack has begun and they've started to get a foothold in an environment or been able to even fully ransom and encrypt an environment. That's when they sort of are alerted, oh, I've got a fish on the, I got someone on the hook now. Let's start this. And so, they're it's a crime of opportunity, and one that's being done increasingly automated. So
Yeah, I love that, and makes me think about something we will talk about. But I've always loved the comparison to they're going around just checking doors, right, and checking which ones are locked, which ones are unlocked, and that'll bring us to what we're going to talk about in a bit, is why we do see requirements like MFA coming up, right? Is because these guys, just like Andy was saying, they're going around checking locked doors, right, and trying to find the ones that are easiest to get into, right, is what we're
Yep.
saying. So and to talk about a couple other numbers specifically kind of around ransomware in the legal industry, and specifically the small to medium sized law firms. The average payout for a ransom was 220,000, which not necessarily huge for some of the big law firms, but can be devastating to some of our smaller and medium-sized law firms. And then I think even the bigger number than that is the average downtime for those law firms, right? Being 23 days of being down during that ransom attack. So just have to ask yourself, can you actually afford to be completely down, shut down for 23 days? Is that something that you can do? And then of course, another important one I always like to point out is just the attack on reputation, right? During that whole time, you're down, your reputation is going to be hurt consistently throughout each day that goes forward. Your reputation is just taking another hit and another hit.
Yeah, and obviously law firms, the hourly rates. I mean, it doesn't take a math genius to sort of multiply whatever the hourly rate of your various attorneys are by 23 days, right? That those numbers can be pretty big, pretty fast, right? And I think the ransomware payments themselves, right, at $220,000, that's a big number for anybody. Even a large firm like that, that's a decent salary. But the ransom itself is often less than a third of the total cost of an incident, right? So you're thinking, that's why we're seeing those numbers that are kind of well over a couple $1 million. And yeah, I mean, I think law firms in particular, you're trusted with some of the most confidential data from your customers. That's why we have attorney-client privilege, right? Like, imagine how embarrassing and problematic that is, and often tough to calculate how impactful that could be over years, right, and damaging, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah, and so we are seeing this real shift, this pendulum, as we like to refer to it, has really swung. And it swung from being really easy to get cyber insurance, where it could almost, policy could almost be written and signed on a napkin, to actually being quite difficult and having actual requirements, specifically technological requirements that we're going to get into here. But we've really seen this shift over the last 12 to 18 months, as I'm sure a lot of us have seen things like headlines, right? A lot of these attacks. And if you click the next slide here, we'll see, really why the demand for cyber insurance is on the rise, right? We're all quite a bit more aware, I would say, of these types of attacks than we were even 12 to 18 months ago, right? As the headlines have just continued to grow and grow, and really hundreds of thousands of companies have just been getting hit over the past 2 years, really, when you look into it. And it's really no longer just the IT team, right, that is worried about these types of attacks. Now suddenly, management teams, customers, suppliers, everybody is worried about these attacks just because of how intricate they can get, how messy the incident response can be. All of that is leading to much more widespread understanding and knowledge about these attacks, and just awareness, I would say, is the main thing here. A great stat is the FBI reported last year over 700,000 attacks, which adds out to 2,000 plus attacks every single day. Just insane, right? The numbers that we're seeing.
It's crazy, right? And I think so many people, right? You read in the newspaper, Colonial, JBS, T-Mobile. I mean, literally every week it's another large company. What you don't see, but I think people increasingly, you hear about from somebody, a friend of a friend, a family member, somebody at your church, somebody at your country club, somebody at from school, is having these events. It's hitting it's not newsworthy anymore that it hits a small business, but it's happening literally every day. And so, I think that's getting everyone sort of aware that they need to think about these types of issues, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so the opposite side of that, right, of demand being supply, the supply of cyber insurance has also decreased, right? Specifically, right now, as that demand increases, underwriters have tens of thousands, right, of applications that are actually backlogging. So they are in this position where they can be a little pickier, right? But also not only that, but after really decades of having this almost surplus of supply, the market has contracted now, right? We're seeing record losses across carriers over the last couple of years, and so that's why we're also seeing a contraction, right, in the market. We're seeing companies adding reduced limits, right? We're seeing carriers add things like reduced limits, actual reduced coverage, and things like higher premiums, right? As we continue forward, and we're seeing this genuine pendulum swing.
Yeah. Yeah, and we cite this stat from Net Diligence, which is a conference that happens twice a year with a lot of big carriers. Something like 40% of companies got a denial, right? And that's pretty unique. Yeah, I think the underwriting teams, the carriers have put things on pause. I've talked with numerous underwriters where it's saying, our goal for this year was to be flat or even down in terms of the amount of volume that we're doing. Insurance is very different than selling jeans, right? It's not about just selling more. That next deal you do can be the one that wipes out all of the revenue and profit from even several years worth of business. So they're cautious, right? And trying to get a handle on particularly what ransomware is doing, and how it's impacting different businesses. And we've seen several industries, energy, manufacturing, which historically, because they haven't had a lot of private records, have suddenly been impacted, and so and now they're sucking up a lot of the essentially the supply, and so that's been impacting things and just generally making people cautious. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And why we're seeing things like requirements, right, pop up, bringing back around, the metaphors, so to speak, that we were talking about earlier, where the bad actors are going around, checking locked doors, right? We do see one of our first requirements that we saw pop up was multi-factor authentication, right? And the reason being is just because of what multi-factor can protect against, right? It's almost like that initial deadbolt, I feel like, on that front door that's going to at least give those bad actors that initial obstacle that might make them move on to the next guy, right? MFA actually is incredibly effective. It blocks, typically over 99.9% of account compromised attacks, right? So at least taking care of one type of attack there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's if you've got modern systems, it's essentially free. I know it's sort of annoying for folks, but I think working with folks like WAMS, you can improve what that experience is like. There's a subtle move towards sort of passwordless environments, even where all the credentials are stored inside. Something like Dua or Okta, one of these single sign-on solutions. So there are ways to make it actually easier for folks and more secure at the same time. So.
Yeah. And then number two, the second requirement we have seen arise really in the past 12 to 18 months is good offsite backups, right? The offsite, having an offsite, data storage backup really vastly increases the speed in which you are able to get back up and running, right? If you're able to have an offsite backup and an incident occurs, you're suddenly able to get back up and running much faster than searching for maybe an old system to try and get back up and running, and thus in accordance reduces the overall cost of downtime, right? We saw being down 23 days, and the potential cost of that when you start thinking about things like revenue stream and salaries and all of that. So ultimately really wanting to reduce that downtime. So we're seeing that as really that second requirement, in the insurance space, because ultimately will greatly reduce the potential damage of an incident, right?
Yeah, and I'd say basically multi-factor authentication and good backup are sort of table stakes now. Basically, if you don't have these things in place, going to be very challenging for you to get coverage. And then I think what we're seeing next is sort of coming along is good endpoint protection, whether, there's numerous acronyms, and EDR, endpoint detection and response, or MDR, managed detection and response, kind of different flavors of them, and we're seeing slightly different requirements from different carriers. And there's lots of different brands. I know WAMS uses several, but that really just gives you, visibility down into the end devices, right? And being able to stop attacks there. We see this sort of as an on the bubble requirement, but it probably coming soon. EDR can be one of the more involved rollouts, and often comes with more of a price tag than backup or multi-factor authentication. So I think good security teams would be smart to start talking and thinking and building in their budgets EDR. It's worth it. We run, and have been for a long time, have good EDR on the back end of our stuff. But it is somewhat of a, it's a transition for sure. So and so just to pull back and sort of think through how organizations should be operating in this landscape, right? So I think one thing is just to overall get your cybersecurity house in order, right? It's and I feel like on many of these in many of these presentations, we're sort of preaching to the choir. Often it's the technology teams, it's the security teams who are joining these calls, and you've been probably jumping up and down saying that your folks need to do this for a long time, and it's sort of dragging the rest of them. And I think one of the things that the impact of bringing insurance into the conversation and including us there is it's relatively easy for some folks who are maybe outside the technology space to understand the words like you're uninsurable, or you're going to not be able to get insurance. Those words mean, if you're driving a car that you can no longer get auto insurance for, or your house is no longer insurable, that hey, it's probably time for me to invest in these things, right? Get a new roof, get a car with airbags and anti-lock brakes and all of these sorts of things, right? And I think the other thing is, you want to really get high quality advice here, right? I think this market is changing. We've seen it change quite quickly over the last 12 to 18 months. We're seeing different requirements from different carriers. The coverage is changing and unique. This isn't like buying home insurance or some of the other more sort of traditional lines where there's a lot of things are much more established. You want to make sure you have someone who can really walk you through that. This is all that we focus on and all that we do. And I think the other thing that people need to realize is that getting insurance and buying cyber insurance is not like buying jeans, right? If you go to the store and you don't fit in the jeans, you can't necessarily go back, the next week or the next month when you do fit in, right? Like if you get denied by a carrier, if you don't meet their requirements, that market will be that carrier likely is not going to be willing to ever offer you coverage in that year, potentially in several years down the road. Partly, as we talked about, they've got so many applications that do they really want to take someone who's been on the bubble, right? Like they're trying to do an assessment that they realize is imperfect if they're starting to even get some signals that this isn't a good fit. The fact that you now meet the signals that they told you about means that they're often hesitant. So one of the things that we can do is actually, do some of this pre-underwriting assessment. We have this tool, the Cyber Insurance Readiness tool, that we can run on environments, tell you what the carriers, how you're going to actually get graded by the carriers. It'll highlight any vulnerabilities that you have, any other issues that will be red flagged by them. And we work with WAMS to do that, to make sure that you address all those issues. I think our view is really that there should be immense collaboration between folks on the the insurance side, as well as folks on the sort of in the technology space, and the companies themselves. We're all collaborating together to address this this issue of cyber risk, and there's huge benefits for us doing that in a collective way. Unfortunately, what you see from some insurance brokers, sort of traditional guys who don't just specialize on this, they don't have the capabilities to do. They don't have the technology tools. They often aren't. There's a lot of details in cyber, both on the technology side and on the insurance side. And overall, this can be scary, and to think through, does this, how do you address this problem? And I think, we present this barbell graphic and strategy to help people understand that this is something that they can solve, and they really want to use a strategy like this to kind of start to get their arms around things, right? They should be investing the majority of their dollars on the technology and the compliance side, and WAMS, can help them with all of those sorts of things, but also making sure that they're investing, some portion of their dollars on the insurance side to address these sort of catastrophic risks. I think, again, you think these other areas, you might have airbags and anti-lock brakes and all the best lane changing prevention technology. You still don't drive on the highway without insurance, right? Because you just never know what's going to happen. And particularly in the cybersecurity ecosystem, the more sophisticated the people that you talk to, the more excited they are about having cyber insurance coverage and appreciating the need for it, right? Like this, we are walking backwards into the future here. And what we're trying to do is address the things that we've seen and what's out there, but there are new things coming up. And collectively, I think we can solve this problem. And insurance is one of the things that helps do that. But individually, you should not be rolling the dice with your business that you're going to be the 1 in 100 or a few in 100 that gets hit by an attack that could ruin your business. We just listened to too many sad stories about that. So, we talked about our sort of cyber insurance readiness tool. This is some screenshots from some of our risk assessment tools, kind of trying to understand what individual companies are facing, both from a likelihood to detect an incident as well as the combined worst loss. How bad it could be based on the specific postures that you have. Happy to run this for any organization, as well as think about how you're going to match up to the different carriers' requirements. So, next steps out of this call, anyone who's on this, reach out to us, reach out to WAMS. Together we can run this readiness tool. It takes, sub 10 minutes to do that. Ask about 5 or 6 questions, and then, it'll literally run on your environment. So we just need to know your basically your domain, your email address, and we can flag any vulnerabilities, any open ports, any other issues that we're seeing from an internal perspective as well. And then, you can work with WAMS to address any of those issues if any come up before you end up needing to get coverage. But if that's green flagged all the way, which, if you've been a client of WAMS and been listening to them and what they've told you to do, you hopefully will pass with flying colors, and then we can get you a no obligation quote for coverage. That coverage, is still relatively inexpensive for many law firms. I mean, I've seen, often single-digit thousands per $1 million of coverage is typically where I'm seeing things for law firms. That is set to change, and the market is going to reset in January. And so I would try and get coverage. If you have coverage, even some coverage now, it's good as you renew it, and prices are going up, and often insurers want to keep, getting on the books of an insurer is good because they favor renewing their business rather than taking on new clients. So if you're an existing client or you have coverage from one carrier, it's easy to get from another. It's sort of like once you're in the club, right? It's kind of how it works. So we'll stop there. I know we're right about a half hour. If people can stay on and ask questions, but let us know what questions you have. Hopefully this was informative and covered a lot. So thank you, Ashley and WAMS, for having us.
Thank you, guys. Let's see if some questions roll in here. Give people a minute.
Yeah, just while we're waiting for some to come in, I mean, I think one of the things people often ask us is like, what is, are there, I think unfortunately some people believe that cyber insurance is like travel insurance. It's only, it's full of exclusions and very hard to actually make a claim. Um, our experience has not been, that's not been the case, that actually most people who make a claim, as long as they have a good policy in place, they're able to use it. And in many cases, carriers are kind of going out of their way to make sure that they cover their customers and the issues that come up, right? The one thing that we are seeing is that there's cyber insurance sort of comes in two flavors. There's a standalone policy where it's a separate policy, or some people still have it as a rider, in addition to their existing policies. We really recommend that people get a standalone policy. It doesn't necessarily increase the price, but there's just so much more clarity around coverage, just because it's just a much larger insuring document. So, but one of the things that we do with all our customers is actually, as we go get coverage for them, but before we actually bind the policies, we run them through an audit process, basically documenting all of the things that they've done prior to putting that policy in place. That way, if there's ever a question about a claim, we can show to a claims team and to the legal team, here's why and to any regulators asking as well, because often that's the question: did you do all the right things? We can document that at the time of the policy going in place. So.
All right, guys, it looks like we've got a great first question here. We hate MFA. Are we able to require? Are we able to be accepted for a policy without MFA?
There are some. It's hard though, and what I would really encourage you to do is to go talk with WAMS and look at kind of some of these passwordless, a passwordless solution, right? So, most of us are walking around with one of these in our pocket, right? And I appreciate, right, like logging in with all of the different the different one-time passcodes is really annoying. And it slows you down, particularly if you're logging into multiple systems. And so what you can do with some of the passwordless solutions is basically that second factor can be the fact that you have a device on you. So if you can set things up that if your phone is with you, it's not gonna ask you for that second factor. Sometimes it'll even not necessarily need you to type in your password at all, right? And if you've set things up with a good single sign-on. So actually, it's that beautiful place where the most secure is actually also much easier. So unfortunately, I don't, to avoid multi-factor authentication is going to be challenging. And honestly, I wouldn't recommend it. But we can see there are a few carriers who are still doing it, but I would push WAMS and ask them about moving towards passwordless before you go. But ping us and we'll go look and see. I know there are a few carriers that are still doing it, so maybe able to dodge it for a year or two.
Yeah, we're seeing it coming up more and more as well. Okay, another question here. Once we start this process, how long does it take to become insured?
Yeah, so if you're, we can bind stuff literally in, sometimes in under an hour. If you don't have any red flags and you're kind of ready to rock and roll, yeah, it can be really fast. It depends on the size, right? So if you're really big, then sometimes that, an underwriter needs to review stuff. But if you're of reasonable size and you're not doing anything weird, and you're coming up without problems, yeah, it can be really, really fast, right? Sometimes even like 15 minutes. Great question.
Oh, that's great. I didn't even know it could be that quick.
Yeah. No, and we can even do, we even have like installment payments. So sometimes it can, you don't actually have to pay for it the day you buy it, right? Typically, it's not due for like 30 days. So, and then if dollars are at all an issue, we can do premium finance so people can pay basically on a monthly basis. So, in many cases, it's like for small firms, we see stuff, $2,000-$3,000 a year, even sometimes as low as 1,000 if it's a small organization and they have really good security controls. And we joke, it's like the cost of a sandwich a day is you can sleep at night. Gosh, like it really sort of boggles the mind why people aren't getting this coverage, right? You just have to listen to one or two people describe what that's been like to live through one of these incidents, particularly for small organizations, literally going bankrupt. I've literally stood with people in tears describing something that happened decades ago in many cases, and how impactful it's been to them and their business and their whole life, right? It's not with small businesses, this is paying for rent and mortgages and kids' college educations and all those sorts of things, retirements. It's not, I'm not going to get a bonus this year kind of stuff.
So the more security measures you have in place, the less you'll tend to pay for your policy. Is that?
Yeah. You're starting to see discounting of policies based on security controls. Although what you're seeing really this year, you even to get coverage, you have to have security controls in place, right? Like the pendulum swung so hard to a hard market where basically, like, if you're not doing the right stuff, many carriers will basically say, no, we won't take you on as a customer, right? Anytime you sort of reduce the number of players who are offering you coverage, means that you have less options. The prices you tend to see less expensive stuff. I think where we will see the market go is increasingly your security posture and the cost of insurance is tied to each other. The market is not 100% there, where it's super clear. Okay, well, we see from a couple carriers, right? Like you'll get 10-15% off if you have certain security controls in place, but it's not like dollar for dollar where the whole market is divided by security posture and cost. But just the fact that you can get it is why you have to invest in these security controls.
Okay, great. Good clarification on that one. I think those are all of the questions we have, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to John and Andy for another fantastic presentation. If any other questions come up later, you can email us at info@wamsinc.com, and you can also reach out to us with any questions for DataStream, and I'll be happy to forward those questions to them as well and connect you with them.
Yeah, and feel free to email me directly as well. My email is just andy@datastreaminsurance.com, right? Or hop on our website, click the chat bot there. We answer that pretty real time. So, happy to dive in. If you can't tell, this is an incredible, it's crazy to say, but we're passionate about insurance. We actually love doing this and find it really interesting and are here to kind of help customers navigate the space. And I think overall having, an expert team working together with, sort of WAMS on the technology side and us on the insurance side, I think you're doing the right thing in terms of getting that team of experts who can really help you, right? So, cool.
We're here for you. Thanks again, everyone.
Ashley, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for including us.
Yeah, always a good time.
Cheers.